In more than 50 years of NASCAR history, only 2 other drivers ever matched the exact pattern that defines Shane Van Gisbergen's career right now. Total dominance on road courses paired with a historically poor record everywhere else. Both of those drivers eventually turned that weakness around. Shane Van Gisbergen is on pace to become the 3rd driver in modern NASCAR history to do it. And his starting gap between the 2 sides of his record was the widest of any of them. That transformation is not happening in isolation. It is happening at the exact moment NASCAR removed the one shortcut that used to make it optional for him. Shane Van Gisbergen arrived in the NASCAR Cup Series having built his entire racing record outside stock cars. He won 3 Supercars championships in Australia before signing with Trackhouse Racing, and his Cup Series debut delivered an immediate statement, a win on the Chicago Street Course in 2023 in his very first start. By his second full season, national motorsports coverage had already labeled him NASCAR's road course GOAT. Trackhouse Racing has since extended that relationship with a multi-year contract, tying the team's future more closely to his continued development as a driver. For years, the practical arrangement between Shane Van Gisbergen and NASCAR's championship system was simple. Under the format in place at the time, a single win in any regular season race guaranteed a spot in the playoffs, regardless of where a driver stood in points. In 2024, competing a full Xfinity Series schedule, Shane Van Gisbergen qualified for that series playoffs off the back of 3 wins, all of them on road or street courses, entering as the 5th seed in a 12-driver field. Discussing the format that season, he described it directly: the most overcomplicated racing series I've been a part of. At the time, the comment reflected a driver who did not need to fully understand the system's mechanics, because road course wins were already covering him. Between 2023 and 2025, Shane Van Gisbergen made 12 Cup Series starts on road and street courses. He won 6 of them. His average finish across those 12 races was 7. 6. And by the sport's adjusted points plus measure, a scale on which 100 represents the series average, his road course rating stood at 279, meaning his finishing quality ran 179% better than average. Over that same stretch away from road courses in 38 starts, his average finish dropped to 25.0, and his adjusted points plus on those tracks was 48, or 52% worse than average. 2 versions of the same driver existed inside one car, and for 2 full seasons, only one of those versions needed to show up to keep his career on track. That shortcut no longer exists. In January 2026, NASCAR announced a return to a points-based postseason model known as the Chase, replacing the elimination-style playoff system that had been in place since 2014. The redesign followed an extensive review process at NASCAR, informed by a playoff committee that included input from team owners, drivers, manufacturers, and broadcast partners before settling on a format built around 3 stated goals: a larger sample size for determining a champion, added importance for every individual race, and a stronger reward for winning within that larger sample. The change followed direct criticism of the 2025 season finale weekend, when Kyle Larson won the Cup Series championship over Denny Hamlin without leading a single lap in the final race, despite Hamlin leading 208 of 319 laps that day and Larson entering on a 25-race winless streak. Similar outcomes in NASCAR's other 2 national series that same weekend added to the criticism, including a Truck Series title that came down to a 7-wide scramble in overtime, and an Xfinity Series champion who won the title with 2 victories on the season over a rival who had won 10. Under the new Cup Series format, 16 drivers qualify for the postseason based purely on regular season points, with no automatic berth for a race winner outside that group. A win still matters and now pays more, 55 points instead of 40, but a win no longer guarantees anything beyond those points. Points for the 16-driver field are reseeded once the regular season ends, with the top-ranked driver awarded a 25-point cushion over the second seed, and the rest of the field spaced out from there. Whichever driver holds the most points after 10 additional chase races becomes the Cup Series champion, with no elimination rounds along the way. For Shane Van Gisbergen, the practical effect is direct. Every race weekend now carries championship consequences, and the large majority of NASCAR's schedule takes place on ovals, not the road and street courses that built his reputation. His Trackhouse racing teammate Ross Chastain is chasing the same cutoff line from further back in the standings, sitting 18th and 47 points below the line as of the weekend before Richmond, meaning the team's stakes in Shane Van Gisbergen's oval progress extend well beyond one driver. The results through the 2026 season show a driver actively closing that gap, well before the breakthroughs became visible in the results themselves. In the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway in late May, Shane Van Gisbergen finished 11th but ranked 7th in the field on raw speed and 6th on defense, according to NASCAR Insights, with an average running position of 7.81. Days later, at Nashville Superspeedway, that underlying pace produced a result, a fifth-place finish, a career best on an oval track at that point in his Cup Series career. Discussing that progression at the time, Shane Van Gisbergen said the gains were coming from always learning stuff race to race. On July 20 at North Wilkesboro Speedway, he matched that career best with another fifth-place finish, this time on a short track. After leading 4 times for a combined 49 laps, a new personal record for laps led in a Cup Series race on a traditional oval, surpassing his previous best of 12 laps set earlier that year at Nashville Superspeedway. Mid-August brought his most significant weekend yet. At Richmond Raceway, driving the number 7 Spire Motorsports Chevrolet, Shane Van Gisbergen won the pole position for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race with a lap of 23.168 seconds, his first career pole on any oval and his 13th career NASCAR pole overall. The result placed him alongside Daniel Suarez and Marcos Ambrose as the only foreign-born drivers to win a pole position in each of NASCAR's 3 national series. He finished 4th in that Truck Series race despite a mid-race pit road penalty. The following day, in the Cup Series race at Richmond, Shane Van Gisbergen started outside the top 30 in the running order and finished 14th, matching his Richmond finish from 1 year earlier. This time, the result carried direct weight in the standings. Crew chief Stephen Doran called for Shane Van Gisbergen to stay out on older tires during a wave around at the start of the final stage, a strategy that positioned him inside the top 15, and a caution that came after a round of green flag pit stops locked the gain into place. The move increased his points cushion over 17th place Ryan Preece from 47 points to 50 points. Even as Austin Cindric's season-best run at Richmond pushed Shane Van Gisbergen onto the postseason bubble. Cindric now sits 7 points ahead of him, and Bubba Wallace sits 20 points ahead. 2 races remain in the regular season at New Hampshire Motor Speedway and Daytona International Speedway before the 16-driver chase field locks in. The scale of that in-season shift becomes clearer when measured against NASCAR's full history rather than against Shane Van Gisbergen's own season alone. Among drivers whose careers began after 1972, only 2 others carried a road course record as strong as his alongside a non-road record as weak as his, and then reversed the non-road side of that record within a comparable stretch of races. The first was Jerry Nadeau, who posted an adjusted points plus of 116 across 5 road course starts in 2000, against an adjusted points plus of just 35 in 81 non-road starts, before producing a 128 adjusted points plus over his next 20 non-road races. The second was Robbie Gordon, who carried a 166 adjusted points plus over 7 road starts in 2001. Against a 33 adjusted points plus in 54 non-road starts, before rating 91 adjusted points plus over his following 20 non-road races. Shane Van Gisbergen's road course adjusted points plus of 279 is higher than either of theirs, and over his own next 20 non-road races, he has produced a 96 adjusted points plus, becoming the 3rd driver in that 50-year window to complete the turnaround. No driver in the sample entered the transformation with a wider gap between the 2 sides of his record than Shane Van Gisbergen did. Shane Van Gisbergen addressed the shift directly during his media availability at Richmond in August 2026. Asked how NASCAR's revised championship format had affected his own racing, he called the change probably a good thing for the sport and said, I certainly knew I had to get better at ovals. On whether his approach behind the wheel changes race to race, his answer carried a specific qualification. I don't think my mindset has changed every race, he said, before adding that in a handful of recent races, I'm points racing a little bit. He was careful to separate that from driving cautiously overall. I don't think I've ever really point raced trying to stay out of trouble, he said. When you're not driving naturally, you find yourself in trouble. His stated instinct, in his own words, remains to just try and drive every race flat out. Discussing his own sense of the gap closing against his teammate, Shane Van Gisbergen said, "I feel like I'm a lot closer to Ross this year." 2 days earlier, discussing the pressure of the postseason bubble directly, he described the closing stretch of the regular season as carrying a lot of pressure, adding plainly, "We can't afford to have another bad race." Crew chief Stephen Doran linked part of the gain to extra laps in Truck Series competition, saying that track time helped him a ton. Shane Van Gisbergen offered a similar explanation himself, saying gains come from just time, just getting used to things, and noting that these trucks are pretty similar to a Cup car. Teammate Ross Chastain, a 5-time winner on ovals, attributed the turnaround to experience rather than a change in raw ability, noting that Shane Van Gisbergen just didn't do a lot of it in his past and that he's a racer and puts the tire to the limit. Coverage of Shane Van Gisbergen's 2026 season has split into 2 distinct interpretations. One reading treats his oval improvement as direct evidence that NASCAR's new format is producing its intended effect, forcing a driver who might otherwise have relied on a single specialty to develop a complete skill set across every type of track. As of mid-July, before the Richmond weekend, a chase qualification forecast built by analyst Neil Payne gave Shane Van Gisbergen better than a 90% probability of making the 16-driver field, with Austin Cindric the only bubble driver whose own probability sat below that threshold at the time. The other reading raises a separate concern that a driver whose value came specifically from unmatched aggression on road courses may be trading away part of that identity in exchange for incremental, hard-earned gains on tracks where he still finishes, on average, below the series norm. Both readings rely on the same underlying data. His road course numbers have not declined at any point in 2026. His non-road numbers, by every measure tracked across the season, have moved from historically poor toward the low end of average, without yet crossing into it. 2 outcomes remain possible before the chase field locks for good: continued improvement on ovals, layered onto his existing road course dominance, would make Shane Van Gisbergen one of the more difficult drivers in the field to predict once the 10-race chase begins at Darlington Raceway over Labor Day weekend, a driver capable of contending anywhere on the schedule rather than on a handful of tracks. A reversal or a return to the average non-road results that defined his first 2 Cup Series seasons would leave him fighting for a transfer spot he no longer controls through a single strong result, in a system with no win and an exception left to fall back on. 2 races remain on the regular season calendar at New Hampshire Motor Speedway and Daytona International Speedway. Heading into them, Shane Van Gisbergen holds a 50-point cushion over 17th place Ryan Preece, sits 7 points behind Austin Cindric, and trails Bubba Wallace by 20. For Trackhouse Racing, which committed to him with a multi-year extension built around exactly this kind of growth, the next 2 race weekends carry stakes that extend past one driver's playoff spot. Whether the 96 adjusted points plus he has produced over his last 20 non-road starts represents a finished transformation or a still fragile one will be decided on those 2 tracks, not in this discussion of them.